This Sneaks View, episode 2. I'm here with another car enthusiast.
Simon Barr, here in Ellensburg, originally from Yakima.
What you drive?
Drive a 1966 Chevelle convertible super sport.
Okay, we're going to get out there and drive that car in a little while, but first got some questions, man. So first off, what got you into cars? What got you into cars, man?
Well, it was my dad, actually. And interesting story is that this car here was his originally.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was in the Army, and he was stationed over in Germany. And back in the early 70s, I want to say like 70, 71, another guy that was also stationed over in Germany, an Army guy, he had bought this car here in the States, and he had it shipped over to Germany so he could drive it around while he was stationed over there. Well, it turns out that the guy, he got sent back to the States, and he couldn't afford to ship the car back. So he knew my dad, and he offered to sell it to my dad over there in Germany. And I think story is he bought it for about $1,200 and a beer probably. So
damn,
yeah,
that's a good price.
That was a good deal. So he drove it around. My mom is from Germany, so they met over there. So he and my mom would drive that thing around on the Autobahn over in Germany, and it was just kind of their daily driver, back in the day. And you got to imagine it was only a few years old at that point in time.
So it was like a brand new car at that time.
Pretty much was, yeah. And then fortunately, he was able to afford to ship it back when he got sent back over to the States.
That's good though. That's good. So have you always been into cars?
Yeah, pretty much. I remember when I was just a little kid sitting between my dad's legs behind the steering wheel when he'd drive this car or other cars, and he'd be like letting me take the steering wheel, and kind of pretend I was driving, I guess. So I think I got into it just really early, and he was a real gearhead. He really loved old cars. Growing up, we had old cars all around us. He'd always have a project going that I would help him on. So it was just real easy to get into it at an early age. Yeah.
Any specific car that you and him built together?
Yeah, actually, interesting. I had a second car I ever owned was a 1965 Ford Galaxy.
Ooh.
And so he and I had kind of tore that thing down, didn't do a restoration, but just rebuilt the engine, rebuilt all the suspension, and we did that kind of stuff together. So we'd work on that car together a lot.
What happened to that car?
Well, I wrecked it. Just driving it like it was meant to be driven, I guess.
That's how you do it.
Lost control in some loose gravel and spun it into a telephone pole. So the back end of it, right above the rear tire, smashed into the pole. It was crazy because I don't know if I can dig up any pictures or not, but I remember driving that car around, and the whole back of it was just bashed into the trunk. But these old cars are built like tanks. So
So you can still drive it afterwards.
I did. I just drove it around. It was crazy until we got the body fixed on it. Yeah, but eventually, I went off to college, and I needed an economical car, and eventually it just kind of disappeared. We sold it. I don't know whatever happened to it.
Hmm. So overall, when you built this car, this was more because it was your dad. So you decided this is the one you're gonna invest all your efforts and everything in. Is this the dream car you wanted, or was there another car you had in mind?
Well, I don't know if there was another one I had in mind, because this has been in our family. This car's been in our family since I was a baby. So I think growing up with it, it pretty much just became my dream car, whether I wanted it to or not. It was there, and I always knew that, at least I assumed eventually that the car would be given to me. It'd be kind of passed down, and so I just kept up my interest in it. In the summer times, he'd let me take it out when I was old enough. I was 17, 16, 17, had a license, and I would drive it. He'd let me drive it so I could go and wash it. It was one of those kind of things, like, oh, okay, here's the keys. You go ahead and drive it, but you got to wash it and you got to wax it. So he kind of got a little work out of me for driving it around, but it was worth it.
Some cheap labor.
Yeah, child labor. Yeah.
It's funny you say that he would let you sit in his lap and drive the car. It's just, I think that's something that's typical that everyone does. Because I remember with my son, I did the same thing. I remember we would drive around, like when we were living in the trailer park. I would let him kind of steer the car all the way around the lot and stuff, and it's pretty cool. You know what I mean? Because it's a small little bonding time moment that you don't realize that is what it is. So
Oh yeah.
it's pretty neat, and it's crazy how it's just different cultures and they still do that. It's the same thing no matter what.
Yeah. I think one of the, speaking of the bonding, one of the lost kind of bonding moments that a lot of people don't seem to have much anymore is what I remember going with my dad to the various junkyards.
Oh my God. Yes, I do remember that.
We would travel far and wide because he needed a certain part for a certain car, and we'd go to the junkyard, and we'd have to remove the parts, and it was fun though. That's another thing. It was kind of an early car show for me.
Yeah.
Right? You go to these junkyards, and back in the 70s, the junkyards are filled with cars from the 50s and 60s. They hadn't crushed them down or anything. So you'd go there and you'd see old Chevelles, and you'd see Camaros, and old Mopar vehicles, just where they ended up. So it was kind of cool. I love that.
It's funny you say that because I wasn't even thinking about the junkyards, but I do remember I recall with my dad always going to the junkyard, and it was kind of like I would jump in the car and act like you're driving while they're doing stuff or whatever. And then it just became for me, some people like yard selling. I like going to the junkyard.
Yeah.
So when I would go as I got older, I tried to take my kids, but they weren't about that life. Yeah. But it was more like, it brought back those memories, and it was pretty neat because it's just like, oh wow, I didn't know that this car had this, or you sit in the car like, oh, or damn, they did this, or the shifter was down here, or that's, man, you just kick back the memory there. I wasn't even thinking about that.
Well, nowadays you got all these companies that sell these restoration parts, and so you can just find it online and order it up and get these reproductions. But back in that time, they didn't really have a lot of those companies. So if you needed a new emblem for the fender, you'd go to the junkyard. If you needed a gas cap for a certain car, you'd go to the junkyard. If you just needed a small, weird little screw that fit into the heater box, you'd go to the junkyard. It's just what you did.
And it's true, because I have a 71 Monty, and I remember when I first bought that car, I was always trying to find parts, and like I was telling you earlier, the story, I'd been looking for parts for that car forever. And when I took it to the body shop and I had to get the front end, the body man was like, the front end is garbage on this. I'm like, where am I going to find the fenders? And then I was told not to buy the reproduction fenders. And it took me maybe a year and a half to where I finally found a vehicle that the individual had the whole front end where I could purchase it, and it was it's solid. Now I can go on eBay, Amazon, wherever, and there's tons of parts now, and I'm like, where were these parts?
Right.
7 years ago, 8 years ago, and then when I was going to the junkyard, that's the only thing I hated too. There was like 1 or 2 Monte Carlos. Yeah. And I was like, oh man, it's a rare dying breed.
Yeah, they crush them now. You know, they only keep them for so long, and now they become them little squares of metal.
Paperweight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sure. I mean, damn, those are some good memories, man. You know, now you got me thinking back, because even with my dad, I remember I'd go, because my dad paints cars. He does body work and stuff like that. So I remember going to the paint shops with him. You know, all those little things, you don't realize that those are like crucial moments as you get older. Those are like bonding moments. You're like, oh wow, I did do that. Because you stating that pretty much helps me, like, wow, that's a moment too in my life that I never even really thought of. Like, oh wow,
forgot about it.
Yeah,
it's just tucked back there somewhere.
I just remember how to get to the junkyard. How did I learn to get here? You know?
Yeah. I still, when I'm driving around, I drive by a junkyard, it still catches my eye. It's the craziest thing. I will drive by it and I'll still look over at it and I'll try to see what cars are in there. I don't even need anything right now, but I still have that desire to want to go walk around in there and see what's in there.
It's funny you say that, because I think it's towards Wenatchee is where it's at, and there's a side road and there's a huge junkyard right there, and you're up high enough that you can look in, and sometimes I'll look in and then I'll be like, there looks like there's an old Monte Carlo in there, and my wife's like, you have everything already, it's at the house, you said you didn't need no more. But I do the same thing you do. Or like when I drive by Poor Boys on the freeway, I'll start glancing over, like seeing like, oh, is there an old car in there? Is it, you know? And I'll pull in and I'll walk back there. If I happen to even get a glimpse, I haven't done it lately, but I used to do it all the time. If I'd be on the freeway and I would even catch a glimpse, I'd pull in, and I'd walk right in and then walk back where I thought I saw it, and would actually just spend time checking out the car.
It's funny you say that, because it makes me think about that. Not a junkyard, right? But that whole concept, what you just brought up, where if I'm driving around, I do that same thing. If I'm driving and I see, you know, somebody's got a big lot and there's a bunch of cars, looks like busted down cars out there, I'm eyeballing all those cars. I'm looking to see. I'm like, that's another project for me. What do they got out there? I wonder if I could just walk up and offer them some money, and you know, because you hear about that all the time. People just finding these barn finds, you know, car's been sitting there for 40 years under dust. Just take somebody walking up with some cash, maybe, who knows? So I'm always doing that same thing. I'm checking them all out everywhere.
Yeah, I get cut off. there was a God, what year? It was a Fairlane. I can't remember what year. I had seen it like by where I live off Valemont Boulevard, and as the weather went through, the car cover the guy had on it was deteriorating. And so I was looking, I was like, oh, that car's convertible. And I was telling myself, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to check it out, you know. And then I looked over and I saw another one. So it was the donor car for it. And then one day I looked over and I saw someone already putting it up on trailers, towing it. It was one of my buddies. He bought it. And I asked him, I go, how much you get it for? He said $1,000 for both cars. Isn't that ridiculous?
It's crazy. And it happens is a lot of people are afraid to go and talk to the people that own the cars. You know, so you just keep driving by and you keep driving by until that one day those cars aren't there anymore.
And then when you finally go ask, I would have just gave it to you. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'd be like, my wife wanted these off my property, so if you can tow them, you can have them.
See, those are the fines that you want, because then you can really articulate why to your wife. Well, it was free.
It was free.
They gave it to me.
I was helping the guy out. I was helping him out.
I was cleaning his yard.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. It's crazy because we different time frames, and that's similar things we do. Mm-hmm. You know, or like I've seen you at the Vintique show, you know, and I'm always going there getting ideas. I love the fact that in the Vintique shows, every individual there is more willing to help. How'd you do that? Oh, this is how I did it. You know, how'd you get that idea? And they're willing to break it down to you and tell you how they did it, especially how they wired it in and everything. Yeah. I know before when I was doing originally lowrider shows and stuff like that, I wasn't getting that kind of not attention, help, and
Mm-hmm.
so now times have changed because there's YouTube,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
and that I mean I just did my setup, my hydraulic setups on my Monte Carlo, and I was gonna pay someone to do it, but then I was like, I wonder if YouTube has a way to do it, and sure enough, there was a whole excuse me, there was a whole nother video on how to break it down, how to put the fittings, the seals, everything, and I was
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
wow,
Yeah.
So
It's amazing.
yeah, it's crazy how everything's just been changing.
Yeah, I think I built or rebuilt, I should say, the power steering box on this car this last year. It was leaking. Something I didn't get to when I was restoring the car. I didn't realize it had a leak until it was restored and all the parts are on there. So I had to take this box back off, and I found on YouTube a video of how to rebuild the power steering box. It was that easy. I don't want to say it was that easy. It was kind of took a little doing, but there was somebody that had done it, like you're saying, and they videoed it, and it was so helpful, and stopped the leak. So yeah, I hear you. Anytime I got to do a repair on an old car or anything, in the house or whatever, go to YouTube, try to find something. Yeah, yeah.
I'm telling you, man, that has been a money saver. That's all.
Yes.
That's all I can say. It's been a money saver.
Mm-hmm.
So, on the Chevelle,
Mm-hmm.
break it down to me on what you have done.
Well, when my dad left it to me, he had always said, before he had died, he had always said that he's going to leave me the car, but I had to basically make him a promise that I would keep it stock. He always said he didn't want me to hot rod the car, He wanted to keep it as original as possible and keep it stock. So I went ahead and I kept with that. I honored that wish of his, and so after he had died, I drove it around for a while, but the car was old and needed some TLC. So one day it was sitting in my garage basically like this at a different house we had, and I knew I wanted to restore the car, but I didn't have a lot of history in car restoration, but I knew I had to do it. So I just came out one day, I popped the hood, and I started taking the fender off. It was the craziest thing. I just had that moment of, I got to do it, and I'm going to do it right now. So the first thing that ever happened was driver's side fender came off, and once that fender was off, I knew there was no turning back. Yeah. So I had that thing in a 2-car garage. I was able to get the everything taken out. Engine was out, tranny was out. Then I removed the body from the frame. Again, just sitting in the garage. It was crazy, but I found it on YouTube. Another YouTube thing. I found a guy that had shown how to do the removal of the body from the frame in a small location. Instead of taking it to a shop or something. So yeah, body off frame, and then
How'd you get it off?
well, it was complicated. I'll tell you that. So the body mounts themselves have been on there so long that there was some rust and they were tight. So I had to be real patient. I had some PB, some rust, kind of like a WD-40. It breaks things up, and I would spray that on multiple times a day and let it just soak in. And then I'd come out with the big wrench and I'd get it up under the body, onto the nut, and I would start to turn it until it cracked loose. And then I'd stop and I'd spray it again. So it took probably a week for me to get the mounts just off because I didn't want to break them. Once the bolts actually were out and it was not secured to the frame anymore, then it was a matter of I had to kind of jack up the body. I'd use just a floor jack, and I would jack the body up, and then I would put the braces, we call those things.
The jack stands?
Yeah, the jack stands. I lost
Okay.
it. Thanks. I put the jack stands under it to hold the body up so I could reposition the jack and jack it up in a different place. And then I'd have these 2x4 shims that I would keep adding to keep the body going upward. So eventually, when I got that body up far enough off of the frame, I had the wheels still on the car on the frame, suspension still on there, and I had some wheel dollies under each of the tires. Mm. So what I ended up doing is once the body's off that frame, I had to shift the frame over. So I just wheeled it to the side. So I just wheeled it from under it. But you could only wheel it so far, and you have to reposition the jacks to get on the inside of the frame so you could continue to move it. And then the other side of the frame would come and want to hit those braces. So you'd have to move the jack around again. It was real tedious and kind of scary at times, because you got this car is being held up by 2x4s and car jacks at some point.
You did that all by yourself?
All by myself. Yep, did it all by myself.
That
Eventually I had that thing sitting in the garage. The body was up on cinder blocks on each kind of the four corners of it, and the frame was off to the side, just sitting there, wheels, suspension, and all that. So once I got that done, I just started tearing apart the suspension, just started tearing everything off of the frame all the way down, every nut, bolt, washer coming off. And as I went, I took pictures. I took pictures of what it looked like before, because I knew eventually I got to put this back together. And I don't know how long it was going to be before I put it together, so I wanted to make sure I knew what I was doing when that time came. Yeah, I got all that apart. I had little Ziploc baggies labeled with all the washers, bolts, every little piece that came off. Ended up taking all the metal parts down to a finish line in Yakima, where they did some sandblasting on it, and then I had them powder coat all of the suspension parts.
All black?
All black, yep. Just coated it all black, and then eventually start putting it back together with, new, better suspension pieces. Still all stock type, though. Like a lot of people go to the tubular A-arms and stuff, which are good. But because I had told my dad I'm going to keep it as original as I possibly can, all those same parts that came off outside of like bushings that needed changed, all those parts went back on. So it's all still the stock suspension parts on the car. Yeah.
That's good. Dude, it looks nice. I mean, I like it. I like it a lot. And I've seen you drive it. The cool thing about your car is you can drive it from town to town. I've seen, you fly into town, you're taking all over. It's not like you got to put it on the trailer.
Yeah.
So it by itself speaks, miles.
Yeah, I never wanted that. I don't want to tow the car anywhere. I want to be able to drive it wherever it goes.
See, and that's a good thought process right there.
Mm-hmm.
When I did mine, when I removed it off the frame, it's funny because I had no idea, and I should have reviewed YouTube, but I didn't. And so what we did was I called a bunch of my buddies over, and we just lifted it up.
Just lifted it up.
Lifted it up, and then I remember we put it like on a tree, cut pieces of tree. We just put it on there, and that's it. And then we just left it there, because after that, I didn't know what else to do. I was just kind of like, I'll just work on the frame until then, and then we'll see. But I mean, shoot, that's why I asked you how you did it, because everyone has a different process in how they do it, and that's a pretty good process.
Yeah, it worked great. It worked better than I thought it was going to work. I was a little suspicious about it when I saw it online. I'm like, that looks way too easy in a way, to just be able to do it in your own 2-car garage, like regular, ceiling height. I've seen a lot of people will chain to the body, and then they'll use like
a cherry picker.
Yeah, and they'll pull the body off, and I didn't have the ability to do any of that. I had to make do with the room I had. Yeah.
And that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The interior's redone, original. What's up with the interior?
I did redo the interior because it's a convertible, so over the course of the years, the sun really did some good damage, over onto the kind of plastic chrome that is in these cars, and the seats. So the seats have been recovered, but again, all original style. covering. And then I took the whole dash out, took the dash apart, steering column and all that, and then restored that back to, again, just original. I didn't do anything fancy. I know you got like digital gauges in your car, and those are awesome. But for this one, I had to keep it original. That was my promise. So everything that came out went back in. Just had to make sure that it was working correctly. Yeah.
So was that a hassle to make sure it was all working correctly or no?
It was because it's a lot easier just to buy a new part. If you got like a clock that stopped working, you could just buy a new clock, another one of them reproduction parts. But if you want to keep that clock, you got to either figure out what was wrong with it and fix it, or send it to somebody that can actually, restore those pieces. Yeah.
It's crazy because that's one of the reasons I switched to the digital gauges, because I just wasn't gonna. I tried, and the only thing I really got working was the fuel gauge, but the clock side wasn't working, and I kept messing with the tach or the speedometer, and I was like, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm done. So then that's why I bought the digital gauges. But I'm into wiring anyway, so it just made it easier for me.
Yeah.
So that's why I switched. But I mean, if you got the patience or the know-how or the connection or someone to do it, then I probably would have done it too. Looking back at it, I kind of wish there was some things I would have kept original, but I've came too far.
Well, and that's the amazing thing. I have found that being boxed into keeping things original and as stock as possible is a lot harder than being able to just do it the way I want to do it, or the way I think it'll be better, install LED lights or the digital gauges, all that stuff, better suspension. There's a lot of things you can do to make a car better. And it's easy because everybody's selling those parts. But when you got to find specific parts that you can't find at those junkyards anymore, you try to find them online and they'll sell you some nice new different thing to make it better. I'm like, I don't need that. I want what was in there. I need to get this fixed. It's hard to do.
Prime example, yesterday I was fixing the hood latch on the Monty, and I ordered a part off eBay. It's supposed to be original parts car, and when it got there, the hood was not, it would latch, but it was loose. And I was trying to figure out, what's going on. So I ended up taking the old one apart, and came to find out that the spring on my original is longer, taller than the one that they sent me, and stronger. So I ended up having to use my old spring. The only problem was on the old one, I couldn't adjust it, so I had to cut the adjustment to release the spring. So on this new one, I could adjust it now. That was the only issue. If not, I would have kept the original part.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's like you said, it's hard to try to stay with everything original, because even the parts they do sell you, they don't line up half the time.
Right.
So it's kind of like,
yep,
it's a gamble every time.
That's the best advice I can give anybody that is working on old cars, whether it's a full restoration or just trying to fix something. If you can use what was on that car, use it, even if it takes a little doing, because once you get rid of that original part, like you said, sometimes the new stuff just doesn't match up. It's mass produced and not always made in a location that is good for making quality parts. So yeah.
And that's true. The one thing that I do love about these cars that I found out over time is the wiring is not as hard as newer cars.
Right.
And I learned that, like I said, I had to redo my Monty, and it's kind of like, oh, okay. It's just simple. Grounding is the biggest thing. If it's not grounded, you will have tons of issues throughout the whole car. So it's kind of like, it's amazing how just one wire can cause everything to go bad. In these newer cars, like there's all this wiring for this part, and it's like you can kind of centralize certain areas. And in this old car, it's like that one wire will take out the whole thing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. In the old cars, it's like you don't have the little pigtails and stuff. You don't have just the ability to unplug and plug in a whole new batch of wires. Everything is like single wires. You got to do.
It runs it all.
Yeah.
What size of motor you got?
It's a 396. And I did have it rebuilt when I did the restoration. I didn't rebuild it myself. I took it to a guy. So it's probably about a 405 at this point, but it is the original numbers matching engine and transmission. It's got a 2-speed power glide in it.
Oh wow!
Automatic. Mm-hmm.
So any other than that, everything else is stock. Any like no sound system, nothing like that.
Nope, no sound system. You know, the only thing that we did, still when my dad was around, he had taken the original AM radio out of it and put in one of the reproductions that still fits into the standard location in the dash, but it's just a AM FM and it has a cassette, AM FM cassette, because it's been a while now. Yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah, but the only speakers are one speaker up in the dash. Yeah, because it's convertible, so there was nothing
in the back.
Yeah,
that
in the
makes
back.
Sense.
Yeah.
Dude, it's nice. Another question, because I've never owned a convertible. So when you're driving in the summertime, burn your head?
Wear a lot of hats. Wear a lot of hats. Yeah. Yeah.
No, man. I mean, anything else you're gonna do, or are you done with this car?
You know, I'm gonna still work on the interior a little bit. The carpet is still the original carpet, so it could use changed. I've been, you know, kind of just not doing it because, again, that whole idea of keeping it as original as possible. Mm-hmm. I figure the carpet's not all tore up; it's just kind of faded. So I'll probably do that eventually. Nothing else really, though. I think it's pretty much the way I want it at this point in time. Mm-hmm. It's a driver. You know, like you said, I drive it around until something, just like any old car, until something starts to not cooperate with me and I got to work on it. I don't think I'm going to tear into anything else.
Like how they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
That's right.
That's right. So, any more other old cars you're going to do, or is this is, I mean, you done right here?
Well, it depends on what I find as I'm driving around and I'm seeing all those old cars sitting around. I'm always looking for another project, you know.
What would be your other key project that you would want to do?
I still like the Chevelles, but I kind of like either a 65 Chevelle. It's a little more boxy style. I really enjoyed that style. Or go the other direction, maybe like a 70 Chevelle. But those are some of the more popular. That 70 Chevelle is like probably the most popular year, it seems like. So finding one of those isn't easy for less than a small fortune. Yeah. And
if you do that one, how's that one going to go?
You know, any one I do next is going to go however I want it to go. It's going to have performance parts on it. I might put an LS motor in it. I mean, it's going to have all the modern touches, digital gauges, LED lights. You know, it's going to have all of that. It's going to be something I could probably drive from here to New York and not have to worry about it, but it's going to look cool.
That'd be nice.
Yeah.
That'd be nice. I can't wait to see that because I know you will. I know you'll do that. So, okay, well, you know, thanks for coming out. I'm going to close up shop. It was a pleasure having you come through. We'll go drive the car, check it out here in a little bit, and on to the next, man. I'm ending episode 2 on Sneaks View. Me and Simon, we're going to roll out. Peace.
Later.